are certain topics in the Bible, I think, that have a particular interest to us just because they're different. We like to talk about the angels because, we don't know much about angels. We read about angels and we see where angels have been active in the Bible, in the Old Testament, and we get interested in angels. It's something that we don't deal with on a daily basis. It's something that, since we don't know a whole lot about, we're interested in it. The Holy Spirit and God the Father and God the Son, all parts of God, we get curious about that because we know of the Godhead, but how does that work? And how does that work together? What does that mean? And we come up with all these ideas of like a pie or different ways of looking at it as to how we can describe it, because it's hard for us to wrap our minds around. There are all kinds of topics in the Bible like that, and one of them is giants. There was, without a doubt, a time where giants roamed the earth. They are called several different things. They seem to be pretty closely related, and they all seem to be abnormally huge. There were the ones that we call the Nephilim. There were the ones we call the Anakim, and that is because they were the sons of Anak. There were the ones that are the Rephaim, which were also called the Emim and the Zamzummim. And different groups of people referred to these giants as different names, and that's the reason they're mentioned in a couple of different places in the Bible with different names. The most outlandish or interesting thought comes from Genesis chapter 6. There's this time, and as we're moving through the book of Genesis, and you have to remember when you study the book of Genesis, there's a purpose behind the writing of it. And sometimes we have a tendency to look too much into a certain part of the especially the early part of Genesis. Like, for instance, Genesis 1, it was not designed to be a scientific document. It even tells us in chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, that was the history or the genealogy of the heavens and the earth. The book of Genesis has 10 different genealogies scattered out. The Hebrew word is toledot, and there's 10 of them, and the first one is the genealogies of the heavens and the earth. Just supposed to tell us this is the order that it went in. Well, then as you're moving along, and the flow of it up into the flood is to move very quickly and to point out there was a lot going on. They were kicked out of the garden. There were nations established. There was a lot of different cultures that were established. There was a lot of intelligence there, because they tell us that there were music writers and music players, and there were people who could build and all different things. And all that's to tell us that these weren't dumb Neanderthal people. They were smart people. But real quickly, the book of Genesis wants to get over to tell us, and then it got bad. Then it got real bad. And in verse 4, there's this verse that is of particular interest in Genesis chapter 6, where it says, there were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterwards. And so that shows that they were before and after the flood. So there were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Well, the wording here brings about this interesting theology, and it really has confused a lot of folks. There's this view and that there were fallen angels, these sons of God that rebelled and left heaven and came to earth, and then they married women, earthly women, and raised families, and that produced giants. I've heard that my whole life off and on. And I guess, technically, based on just the information we have, that is, I guess, a possibility. I personally don't think that's a likelihood. And the reason I say that is because when we learn about the angels, there's something that Jesus says in Matthew chapter 22 when he's asked about married, what happens in the resurrection. He says, after this life, we become like the angels in this. Not, we don't become angels, we don't become like the angels, but in this way, they're not married nor given in marriage. And the angels were never, and that indicates, now if this was something that was pretty well known in that time, that there were angels that came down and married women, and that was in their Jewish history, and they would have been familiar with it, then that would have sounded really odd to them for Jesus just to have thrown that out. And so Dr. Clyde Woods, in his commentary, the People's Commentary, gives a really good idea on what this could be. It could be that there was a lot going on. He's trying to tell a lot of things in a short amount of time. He's trying to tell us that things were bad. The intents of everyone's hearts were only evil continually. There were giants there. But then this idea of just because it says the sons of God does not mean that those are angels. It doesn't mean that. It could have been that you had a line of people on the earth from Seth. And that was the line of God that came from Adam. Adam, Seth, Enos, Canaan, Heller, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech. Noah, Nimrod, Terah. Then you get the flood. Well, the idea is it's possible he's talking about the lineage of people who had remained faithful to God, the sons of God. And then there was those that had followed Cain and had deviated from God in following him. And those were the sons of men, or the daughters of men. So it's at least possible that the sons of God marrying the daughters of men was just showing that there was a lot going on at this time, just like later when there's when Ezra and Nehemiah come back in and they're trying to resettle. They realize there was all this intermarriage, and these Jews, these Hebrew people were the Israelites, God's people were marrying people from other nations and other pagan religions and coming together, and there was chaos because of it. There was a lot of problems because of it. That's a possibility of what went on here. The truth of the matter is I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. It would seem to me more like the idea here is that there was those who came from the lineage of Seth who were following God were marrying the daughters of those who had not followed God, and that was pulling them away, because we see that later after the flood happened. There's no real indication here that these are these great, phenomenal demigods of some sort that were here. It seems as though it's at least possible that there was just a race of giants that lived on the earth. How did they get here? I don't know. Where did they come from? I don't know. Where did they go? I don't know. The idea is, though, the Bible just really doesn't tell us much about it. We know that when the spies went into the promised land, they saw groups of people and they said, these people are giants. We are like grasshoppers to them. They are enormous. We know that in Abraham's time, there was a king of Bashan named Og, and his bed was 13 and a half feet long, and it was 6 foot wide. And we know that in 2 Samuel chapter 21 and verse 20, that there was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. Now, he was a big old dude. Well, now, all we know about these people is that they were giants. We don't know where they came from exactly, and for us to speculate would be poor scholarship. The idea is they plagued the Israelites for a long time. They warred with some of these giants. Some of these giants were used in battle against them. This king that was over this nation, who was a giant, was one that really plagued the Israelites for a long time. In a lot of ways, it's possible that God was using them to do that. And in a lot of ways, it was just because they were strong. But you and I are aware of the one giant, Goliath. Goliath of Gath. And he was a Philistine. And we know about the battle, and we know all about him, and we know that David went out and fought him. And we know that David went out with some rocks and a sling. And there seems to be a lot of thoughts on what happened here, but it may be a little simpler than what we think. He was a shepherd. He was protecting the animals all the time. He protected them from lions. He protected them from bear. And those guys would take these long slings, they would put rocks in them, and they would practice all day long, swinging those things around, letting it go. And the way they would practice, they would stack rocks up, and they would move a certain distance, and they would knock those rocks off the stack. That's how accurate they could become. Well, David saw this man and thought, he's not going to get close enough for me to need a sword. I'm going to hit him in the head with this rock. I've done it before. I can do this. And they say that he got extra rocks in case his sons came down. You know, it was either if he missed, which he probably wasn't going to miss, he was really accurate with this thing, or if somebody else followed him. Well, I can just pick up another stone and start whacking folks. You know, like this. Sometimes we ascribe a mysticism to these things that is not necessarily in the text. Now, there's no doubt about it that God helped him. And there's no doubt about it that God prepared him. And we know David as the great giant slayer because of that. They sing songs about him. And there's a time where he walks through Gath holding Goliath's sword. I mean, it's a whole weird scenario, but the courage that it took to walk into the giant's hometown holding his sword was pretty gutsy. But there's this other giant that's given a name. And it's one that gets lost in the text. We just read right over it. But there's some really interesting thoughts on this. I want you to go in your Bibles to the book of 2 Samuel chapter 21. I want you to start verse 15 with me. It's just a little short narrative. As a matter of fact, it's right before the passage about the 12-fingered, 12-toed man. There's just this thought here where there's a battle. Verse 15. When the Philistines were at war again with Israel, David and his servants with him went down and fought against the Philistines, and David grew faint. Then Ishbi-Benob, this is the other giant. Then Ishbi-Benob, who was one of the sons of the giant. I believe this is one of Goliath's sons. The Ishbi-Benob, who was one of the sons of the giant, the weight of whose bronze spear was 300 shekels, who was bearing a new sword, thought he could kill David. Well, the idea is there's this battle going on, and Goliath has been made a laughingstock. This great victory has been made over this giant by this young man. And now this young man has rose to prominence. He is a king of a nation. He's leading people. And not only that, this warrior king is going out and fighting among the battle. And there was a giant there who said, that guy killed my dad. I think I can take him. And so he made a beeline straight for David. But the passage goes out of its way to show that David was already growing faint. David was already getting tired in this battle. There was already some fatigue that was setting in. So Ishbi-Benob, who was the son of the giant, in verse 17, Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, came to his aid and struck the Philistine and killed him. The commentators say that it's entirely possible that Ishbi-Benob got to David and was beating him. That seems to be the picture that's being drawn here. We have Goliath standing up and David just taking him out, hitting him in the head with a rock and chopping his head off. And everybody just running because of it, and him giving God the glory. And then him rising to the position of being a king and still going into battle. And now there's this one little passage about the son of this giant who comes after him, and he was growing faint. And one of his mighty men, if you remember, he had that group of mighty men who were ninjas. I mean, they were absolutely fantastic people. These were some of the greatest warriors. One of them jumped down in a pit. He jumped down in a pit to fight a lion. Who does that? You know, who does that? Who says, you know, I want to take that lion and jump down in after it and kills the thing? There's so many stories about these men. Well, they had to come to his aid at this time. And then they make this statement. Abishai, verse 17, the son of Zeruiah, came to his aid and struck the Philistine and killed him. Then the men of David swore to him, saying, you shall go out no more with us to battle, lest you quench the lamp of Israel. David, it's time you take a break from all the battle. We know you like to fight. We know you like your sling. We know you're good with a sword. We know you like to go in battle. We know you're a big dude. I mean, there's no doubt that he was a big dude. If you remember, Saul tried to put David's armor on him, and Saul stood head and shoulders above every man in the army. Meaning David was probably a pretty good-sized fella himself. And so we know he was a big man. We know he was a strong man. And we know he was a fierce fighter, a fierce battle. But this one battle comes up, and they say, you know what? It might be time that you take a break. Some people believe that the way, the structure of 1st and 2nd Samuel, since they were one book, that some of it's a little out of order. Because if you go back several chapters and you see where where he has the Uriah and the Bathsheba situation, there's this phrase, this verse that says that he stayed out when the kings normally went to battle. Some believe that some of this might be just a little out where they hit the highlights and then came back and filled in some of the things, which would have been a writing style of that time. We don't know that for sure, but it does seem interesting that they say don't go out to battle anymore after he had not been going out to battle. But either way, there's something here that we really need to take a look at. There's a couple things I think that are important for us as Christians that we can gain from this. It's fun to talk about giants. It is fun. You've already thought of things that you've heard. Probably most of you have already decided what you're going to tell me when I get out of the pulpit out here about what you know and what you think. And that's fine. These things, the truth is we can't put our finger on these things. We know they existed. We know certain things about them. And we see them showing up in some places where we can make some application. I think one thing that we need to remember here is this. You and I cannot rely on past victories to get us through whatever's in front of us. He was the giant slayer. That's what he was known for. Even throughout history to this time, if you were to walk out here and say, what do you know about King David? Isn't he the one that killed Goliath? He's the giant slayer. That's what he was known for. Again, they sang songs about him. And the reputation that he amassed from that. The entire army of people who have been trained to kill people watched this man walk out and take that giant out. They were afraid to do it themselves. They saw a courage in him. They saw a strength in him. And he had a victory. But that victory did not help him win against Ishbi-Benob. That victory, he couldn't walk up to that giant and go, we don't need to fight. I've already beaten one of you. I've already won once. I don't have to win again. When you and I are dealing with temptation, when you and I are dealing with hard decisions, when you and I are dealing with difficult times, just because we handled it right one time doesn't automatically assure that we're going to handle it right again. And those of us who those of us who've ever been involved in something that we've repented of, maybe it's something that we knew was wrong. We knew we shouldn't have done it, and we took a time in our life to correct that, and we stopped doing that. Just because we stop doing it for a time doesn't mean it's over. Those who have had alcohol addictions and have said, I am going to stop this, they say, I'm an alcoholic for the rest of my life because they know that they have that battle to fight every day. Christians have battles to fight every day. And just because we won before doesn't mean we'll win today. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 13 is a very predominant verse. Talks about temptation and how God will help us with temptation. But the verse right before it, 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 12, says, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Which is an interesting passage in and of itself. But then when you take it, verse 12, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. And the very next thing he says is, no temptation has overtaken you except such as common to man. He's saying, listen, your past victories might not help you as much as you'd like for them to. It is easy when you're winning to step back. I remember when I got out of college and I moved to Tennessee to work at Church Street Church of Christ in Lewisburg, Tennessee. We had it was a phenomenal work. That was so much fun. We had an absolute blast. We had a lot of young families. Everything that we were doing, it just seemed to turn to gold. Everything was just blowing up. It was tremendous. Even our softball team, our church league softball team was good. I mean, we had all these guys who were just out of college. Some of them had played college baseball, and we came back and we were amazing. I mean, we beat everybody. We would beat everybody in that whole town. We'd go over into other towns and play other softball teams, and nobody would even touch us. So we decided that we were going to go down to Gulf Shores, Alabama, and play in a church league softball team. We were good, and we had won tournaments. We showed up down there and got absolutely stormed. I mean, we got beat. There was one team that we couldn't even score a run on. And they ruled us in the first 2 innings. I mean, the guys would get up and they would say, I'm going to hit this one over. And then he'd hit it over. And the next guy would get up and go, I think I'll do that. And then he would hit one over the fence. And it didn't matter where we put the ball. Even if we tried to get it over the fence, they caught them. They caught everything. It was the fastest, most aggressive team I've ever seen. And we walked into that tournament thinking, we're pretty good. Look at all we've done. We walked out of that tournament saying, can we just pretend this never happened? Let's not ever talk this ever again, okay? I don't even think we got a hit the whole tournament. It was awful. We got destroyed. Well, you can't always rely on your past victories. That's what happens here. The giant slayer is faced with another giant. But this time he's tired. But this time he's battle worn. This time the situation's different. He may not have his sling in his hand. He may not even see him coming. He may not even know the giant's on his way towards him. I don't know what the situation is. I just know that beating Goliath didn't help him with this one. And you and I need to remember that today is a battle for our souls, but so's tomorrow. And I might have won today, but that doesn't mean I'll win tomorrow. Meaning, we need to stay on guard. We need to stay on our toes. I want to say this, though. I think it's in a Christian's life, there are days that not messing up was victory. You didn't do anything great. You didn't do anything outstanding. That's a point I've made before, but I think that's one Christians need to remember. Sometimes preserving yourself to be useful for God requires days where we just didn't mess up. And sometimes that is the victory. Sometimes that is the win. Sometimes that is the battle. But just because we beat it one time doesn't mean we'll beat it this time. The second thought from this passage I think is interesting is Satan does not give up after he beats you once or after you beat him once. I am very, very afraid of Satan. I am very, very afraid of Satan. Satan is stronger than I am. And I know you're already thinking, yeah, but God's stronger than him, and that's fine. And God will stand with me and fight the battles with me, but I still have to play my part in the battle. And I'm the weakest in that three. When you put God and Satan and me in the middle, I'm the weakest. But I might get a victory. I might stand against temptation. I might get something right. But that doesn't mean it's over. And there's an interesting passage. Luke is the one that records this. In Luke chapter 4, talking about the temptations of Jesus. There's indication that there were more temptations than just the ones that we read about. Because it was a long period of time. We get these three very specific things, but it seems as though there were more temptations. And in chapter 4, verse 13 of the book of Luke, it says, now when the devil had ended every temptation, he departed from him until a more opportune time. I've got to remember that Satan is always looking for a more opportune time in my life. If he looked for a more opportune time in Jesus, then he's looking for a more opportune time in mine. I have to be ready and I have to be on guard, and I can't put my guard down, and I have to tell myself I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian today. I'm going to be a Christian tomorrow. I'm going to be faithful to God today, and I plan on being faithful to God tomorrow, and that may not feel like what I think it ought to feel like. But the concept here is that Satan is not going to give up. He loses. You got to remember, Satan loses. We know the end. He loses, but he gets to win a lot of battles between now and there. He loses the war, but he wins a lot of battles between now and the end of this war. I don't want to be one of the battles he wins. And so I have to do my part. I understand. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. I always thought that passage was interesting, that he's a roaring lion. That's not how you see lions hunt. They don't roar to let you know they're there. They sneak up on you, but he's there and he's telling you, I'm right here and I'm coming after you. But I also know that James 4:7 says, therefore submit to God, resist the devil, and he'll flee from you. But I don't think that means he will flee for you forever. Because you can't rely on past victories to get you through this one. And Satan doesn't give up after you win one of these situations. We see that right here in this passage. There was a giant that came in, he won. There's always another giant. There's always another giant. There's always another battle. There's always another challenge. And that's what this life is about, is facing those things with confidence in God and obedience to God and letting him be him, but making sure that I'm who I need to be as well. A third thought in this I think is interesting is we all need help at times. The giant slayer didn't need any help. I mean, if you read through and look at a lot of the things that David said, he was quite a smack talker. I mean, he was confident, and he would say some things that were pretty interesting. There were some things of great confidence that he would say. And when he showed up with the cheeses that his dad had sent him to the battle, and he saw this giant out there, and he saw all this army, I'm sure there's all kinds of things that were going through his mind. What is wrong with y'all? Why don't y'all get in here? Who's going to beat this guy? I thought y'all were stronger than this. I thought you were the army of God. I mean, there's all these things I'm sure that's going through his mind that he wants to say. He walks out there in front of 2 nations of people, 2 nations of soldiers, and wins. But when the next giant shows up, he needs some help. That's what the church is about. That's what we're here for. That's why our relationships and our friendships, that's why our care for one another and our concern for one another and our kindness and our desire to look at somebody and see them for who they are and notice if something's wrong and say, I'm here for you. I'll help you. Listen, if you're struggling with something, the reason we offer the invitation is not because we want people to come forward. It's because we want you to know that you're loved. And we want you to know you don't have to do this all by yourself. Sometimes everybody needs help. Sometimes you need help. Sometimes I need help. And that's what the church is about. And if we can't do that, then we can't call ourselves the church. I want you to think about that. We've got to be really, really good at meeting the needs that we see in others. We've got to be really good because we all need help sometimes. The giant slayer needed some help with the giant. You may be the most morally upstanding person in this room. That would be hard because there's a lot of morally upstanding people in this room, but you might be the most morally upstanding person in this room. You might have withstood the most amount of temptation. You might be the one who walked through fires of tribulation in your life, and you're standing on the other side with a couple of scars that nobody can see. But you need help. You can't do it by yourself. That's the reason you need the Lord's church. The last part of this I think is interesting is they come to him and they say, David, maybe it's time we reconsider the way you view this battle. We can't lose you. You're too important. We don't want to extinguish the light of Israel. You're the one that everyone looks to. You're our leader. We don't want to lose you. You're too important. Well, listen, in this story right here, everybody's too important to lose. In the church that Jesus died for, everybody is too important to lose. Everybody. You are too important to lose. I don't care what you think about yourself, and I don't care what you think others think about you. You are too important to lose. We need you. But, as you see in this passage, sometimes our roles change. The giant slayer, the warrior king, was also known as the shepherd king. You know, sometimes our roles change. Sometimes we go from being the leader to needing to be led. Sometimes we go from being the one who's winning the battles to get somebody to needing somebody to help us. What about Moses? You stand on top of this mountain and you raise your hands and you'll win the battle. That's hard. I need help. And the battle was won because somebody else that we never heard of did their job. And in holding up that hand, his role changed. His name was Hur. So her role changed. The idea here is there are different places in our lives. And that's okay. You don't have to always be the strong one. You don't always have to be the solid rock. Sometimes you need somebody else to be the rock. You don't always have to be the one that's forging forward. Sometimes you need somebody else to help you. It's okay to have moments where we need to take a break. Not from Christianity. Not from Christianity. But from the way we're doing things. Our perceived roles. Sometimes we're at different places in our lives. Sometimes those of you who have lost a loved one and you've spent your life serving other people, maybe your role now is to let other people serve you. You don't want that though, because you've spent your life serving people, but your role may have changed. You're still going to serve because of who you are. You're still going to be active and involved because of who you are, but it may look different. I don't know what David did every time they went out to battle. I know what he did one time, and that was he messed up. But that's not who you are. And that's not who we're going to allow ourselves to be. But sometimes things change. Something changes in our lives. And what we've always wanted to be and what we've always been and what others know us as needs to be adapted a little bit. As long as that is within the confines of doctrine and morality, that's okay. If that's in the confines of commitment and a love for God and a desire to serve Him, that's okay. I know of a lady who was a preacher's wife for many years. Her husband passed away. They had 6 children. They were grown when he passed away. But she had always been the preacher's wife and the mom. She was a preacher's wife, a mom, and a Bible class teacher. That was her identity. That's who she was. Her kids were grown and really had moved away for the most part. Her husband died and she didn't know who she was. She found a way to serve. As a matter of fact, they put her in office in the church building, and she had 35,000 World Bible School students. I'll say it again, 35,000 World Bible School students that she worked with. Her role changed. And that's okay. Sometimes our role changes to be a little busier. Sometimes it's a little less busy. But whatever it is, as long as we are who God wants us to be, striving to be the way God wants us to be, it's okay. It's okay for things to change a little bit. The benefit of that is it gives other people opportunity to step up and take those places. There was a time in your life, senior members, where you stepped up and filled a void. There's place for that in this congregation. That doesn't mean you quit. You better not. It doesn't mean you give up. You better not. It doesn't mean you're unnecessary. That's ridiculously wrong. But sometimes roles change. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.